The Galactic Imperial Station orbited the gas giant Xerion Prime like a gleaming metal flower, its 12 petals housing different species from across the known universe. Each section was carefully designed to accommodate the specific needs of its inhabitants, from the methane-breathing Vorthak to the silicon-based crystalline collective. But nowhere on the station was more heavily guarded or more luxuriously appointed than the Royal Wing, where Queen Zephyra of the Draconian Empire maintained her temporary residence. Marcus Chun pushed his cleaning cart down the pristine corridors of Level 7. The soft hum of the air recyclers, the only sound breaking the early morning silence. At 32, he had been working as a maintenance technician on the station for 3 years, ever since the mining accident on Titan, for it had left him with a pronounced limp and ended his career in the asteroid belts. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and most importantly, nobody bothered him. He kept his head down, did his job, and stayed out of the complex political machinations that seemed to consume everyone else on the diplomatic levels. The human section of the station was modest compared to the others. Humanity was still considered a junior species by most of the Galactic Council, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago. They were tolerated, sometimes even appreciated for their adaptability and work ethic, but they were definitely not considered equals to the ancient races that had been traveling between stars for millennia. Marcus didn't mind. He had grown up on Earth's overcrowded colonies, where keeping your head down and working hard were survival skills. The station's artificial gravity was set to Earth normal in the human quarters, the lighting mimicked a 24-hour cycle, and the food processors could make a decent approximation of pizza. It was more comfort than he'd had in years. As he made his way through the corridors, Marcus noticed an unusual amount of activity in the diplomatic quarter. Security drones hummed overhead in tight formations, and he spotted several members of the Altarian Honor Guard in their distinctive blue ceremonial armor. Something big was happening, but that was nothing new on Level 7. The diplomatic section was always hosting some delegation or another. Marcus, the voice belonged to Zara Okafor, one of the few humans who worked in the diplomatic corps. She hurried toward him, her usually perfect uniform slightly disheveled and her dark skin gleaming with a sheen of nervous perspiration. "Morning, Zara," Marcus replied, pausing in his work. He had known Zara since his first day on the station. She was brilliant, spoke 7 alien languages fluently, and had a talent for navigating the treacherous waters of interspecies diplomacy. She was also one of the few people who treated him like a person rather than just part of the station's infrastructure. "Thank God I found you," Zara said, glancing nervously down the corridor. "I need your help with something, and it's complicated." Marcus raised an eyebrow. In his experience, when diplomats said something was complicated, it usually meant someone was about to get fired, arrested, or possibly both. "What kind of help?" "The kind that could either save my career or end it spectacularly," Zara admitted. "Look, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to clean the Royal Wing." "The Royal Wing?" Marcus almost laughed. "Zara, I don't have clearance for that. Hell, I'm not even supposed to be on this level without an escort." "I can get you clearance," Zara said quickly. "Temporary access, just for today. The thing is, Queen Zephyra specifically requested human cleaning services." Marcus stared at her. Queen Zephyra was the ruler of the Draconian Empire, one of the most powerful interstellar civilizations in the known galaxy. The Draconians were an ancient race, proud and fierce, with a military that had never been defeated in open battle. They looked like what humans might imagine dragons to look like if dragons had evolved intelligence and learned to walk upright. Tall, covered in scales that ranged from deep emerald to midnight black, with wings that could span 20 feet and eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. "Why would she want human cleaners?" Marcus asked. "That's the complicated part," Zara said, lowering her voice. "She's here for the peace negotiations with the Vorthak hegemony. It's a really big deal. These 2 empires have been at war for over 1,000 years. But there's a problem with her children." Marcus had heard rumors about the Dragon Queen's twins. They were supposedly the first draconian royal offspring born in over 3 centuries, which made them incredibly important both politically and biologically. The survival of the draconian royal line depended on them. What kind of problem? Zara looked around nervously, then stepped closer. They won't eat. Haven't eaten properly in weeks. The queens brought in specialists from across the galaxy, xenobiologists, nutritionists, even mystics from the ethereal conclave. Nothing's working. The twins they're dying, Marcus. The weight of that statement settled over them like a heavy blanket. If the draconian royal twins died while under the protection of the Galactic Station, the political ramifications would be catastrophic. The peace negotiations would certainly collapse, and depending on how the queen handled her grief, there could be open warfare. I still don't understand what this has to do with me, Marcus said. Yesterday, during one of the medical consultations, one of the twins saw you through the observation window. You were fixing a lighting panel in the corridor. The kid perked up for the first time in weeks, started chittering and pointing. The queen noticed, and she's convinced that humans might be the key to solving this problem. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Zara, I'm a janitor. I fix broken things and clean up messes. I don't know anything about alien children or royal protocols or, about being human, Zara interrupted. And right now, that might be exactly what those kids need. The request was insane. Marcus knew that if he screwed this up, it wouldn't just be his job on the line. Diplomatic incidents had started wars. But as he looked at Zara's desperate expression, he found himself thinking about the twins. He had grown up with younger siblings, had helped care for his baby sister when their parents were working double shifts in the processing plants. He knew what it was like to be hungry, to be scared, to be too young to understand why the adults around you seemed so worried all the time. What exactly would I be doing? He asked. Officially? Cleaning the royal wing. Unofficially? Just be yourself. Be human. Maybe the twins will respond to you the way they responded yesterday. Marcus looked down at his cleaning cart, with its collection of scrubbers and polishers and chemical sprays. It wasn't exactly the equipment of a diplomat or a child psychologist. But then, again, maybe that was the point. If I do this, he said slowly, and if something goes wrong, you'll make sure my sister gets my pension, right? Zara's expression softened. Nothing's going to go wrong, Marcus. The queen is desperate, but she's not stupid. She won't blame you if this doesn't work. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself standing outside the entrance to the royal wing, his temporary access card feeling impossibly heavy in his pocket. The corridors here were different from the rest of the station. Wider, with higher ceilings that could accommodate the Draconians' impressive wingspans. The walls were decorated with what looked like living murals, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as he watched, telling stories of ancient battles and distant worlds. The security checkpoint was manned by 2 Draconian guards who examined his credentials with the kind of intensity usually reserved for bomb disposal experts. They were both massive, even by Draconian standards, their scales a deep crimson that seemed to glow under the corridor lighting. When they spoke to each other, it was in a language that sounded like controlled fire, all hisses and growls and clicking sounds. Finally, one of them spoke to Marcus in accented, but perfectly clear standard. Human Marcus Chun, you will proceed to the residential quarters. You will not deviate from the prescribed path. You will not touch anything that is not related to your cleaning duties. You will not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand these instructions? Yes, sir, Marcus replied, his mouth suddenly dry. The queen is with her offspring. She will observe your work. Do not approach the royal children unless specifically instructed. Do you understand? Yes, sir. The guard stepped aside, and the massive doors slid open with a sound like distant thunder. Marcus pushed his car through the entrance and into a world unlike anything he had ever seen. The royal wing was less like a diplomatic residence and more like a piece of another planet transported intact to the station. The floors were covered with something that looked like living crystal, warm beneath his feet and giving off a soft, pulsing light. The air was thick and humid, with a faint smell of sulfur and growing things. Plants he didn't recognize grew from the walls themselves, their leaves spanning the spectrum from deep purple to brilliant gold. And Everywhere, there was the sense of vast, ancient power. This wasn't just luxury. This was a display of what a civilization could accomplish when it had had millions of years to perfect its arts. The humans' best efforts at grandeur would look like children's toys in comparison. Marcus followed the prescribed path deeper into the residential area, his cart's wheels silent on the crystal flooring. He could hear voices ahead, the same musical fire language he had heard from the guards, but softer, more melodic. As he rounded a corner, he got his first look at Queen Zephyr herself. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Nearly 9 feet tall, with scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies, shifting between deep green and midnight blue as she moved. Her wings were folded against her back, but Marcus could see the power in them, the careful way she held them so they wouldn't knock into the station's human-scaled furniture. Her head was elegant and reptilian, with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to see everything. And curled up on what looked like a nest made of precious metals and soft fabrics, barely moving, were her children. The twins were small, probably no bigger than human 10-year-olds, though Marcus knew draconian development didn't follow human patterns. Their scales were a pale silver green, much lighter than their mother's, and they lay pressed against each other in a way that spoke of fear and exhaustion. Their eyes were open, but they stared at nothing, and even from across the room, Marcus could see the way their breathing was shallow and labored. Queen Zephyr noticed his arrival immediately. She turned those golden eyes on him, and Marcus felt like a mouse being examined by a hawk. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder, carefully modulated to avoid shattering the station's human-built fixtures. "You are the human my offspring showed interest in," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, trying to remember the proper protocol Zara had quickly briefed him on. "I'm here to perform cleaning duties, as requested." The Queen studied him for a long moment. "My children are dying," she said finally. "The finest minds in the galaxy have examined them, provided treatments, offered solutions. Nothing has worked. They refuse food, they barely sleep, they waste away before my eyes. And yet yesterday, when they saw you through the window, they showed the first sign of life they have displayed in weeks." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He looked at the twins, so small and fragile-looking, and felt something twist in his chest. They reminded him of injured birds he had found as a child, too hurt to fly, but still fighting to survive. "I don't know anything about draconian physiology, Your Majesty," he said honestly. "I wouldn't know how to help." "Perhaps," the Queen said, "that is precisely why you might succeed where others have failed." She gestured with one clawed hand toward his cleaning cart. "Perform your duties. I will observe." Marcus nodded and began to work, starting with the areas furthest from a nest. The royal wing didn't really need cleaning. It was maintained by automated systems far more advanced than anything in the human quarters. But he went through the motions, polishing surfaces that were already perfect, adjusting decorative objects that were already precisely placed. And all the while, he was aware of being watched, not just by the Queen, whose golden eyes tracked his every movement, but by the twins. He could feel their attention like a physical weight, and when he risked a glance in their direction, he could see that both small heads had turned to follow him around the room. Marcus had worked in dangerous environments before. He had crawled through the twisted wreckage of mining equipment while fires burned all around him, had worked in a vacuum of space with nothing but a thin suit between him and eternity. But nothing had ever made him as nervous as the weight of those 4 pairs of eyes watching his every move. As he worked his way closer to the nest area, he began to hear something that made his heart skip. The twins were making sounds, not the musical fire language of their mother, but small, curious chirping noises. When he looked up, one of them was sitting upright in the nest, its head tilted to one side as it watched him work. The Queen noticed too. Her entire posture changed, becoming more alert, more hopeful. "Continue," she said softly. Marcus moved closer, cleaning a decorative table near the nest. The chirping sounds grew louder, and now both twins were sitting up, their pale scales catching the light. One of them, he couldn't tell if they were male or female, extended its neck toward him, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. And then, for reasons he couldn't explain, Marcus found himself humming. It was an old song, something his mother had sung to him when he was small and couldn't sleep. A simple human lullaby about stars and dreams and finding your way home. He hummed it quietly, unconsciously, as he polished the table's surface. The effect on the twins was immediate and dramatic. They both perked up, their eyes becoming bright and alert for the first time since he had entered the room. One of them tried to mimic the melody, producing a sound like wind chimes made of crystal. The other began to move, not the listless, shifting Marcus had seen before, but purposeful motion, crawling closer to the edge of the nest. Queen Zephyra made a sound that Marcus realized was a gasp of surprise and hope. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just humming," Marcus replied, not stopping the melody. "It's something humans do when we work. Helps pass the time." "Continue," the queen commanded, and there was something in her voice Marcus had never heard before, vulnerability. So Marcus continued to hum as he worked, and the twins continued to respond. They moved more, made more sounds, and most importantly, they began to show interest in their surroundings for the first time in weeks. When Marcus finished cleaning the table and moved on to another area, both twins actually climbed out of the nest to follow him, their movements unsteady but determined. For the first time since he had entered the royal wing, Queen Zephyra smiled. The next morning, Marcus found himself standing outside the royal wing again, his cleaning cart loaded with supplies he probably wouldn't need. Word had spread quickly through the station's human quarters about his unusual assignment, and he had endured a night of questions, advice, and barely concealed envy from his coworkers. But none of that mattered now as he faced the massive doors that led to what might be the most important cleaning job in galactic history. The same Crimson Scale guards were on duty, but their demeanor toward him had shifted noticeably. Where yesterday they had treated him like a potential security threat, today they nodded respectfully as he approached. Word traveled fast in the royal wing, apparently. "Human Marcus Chun." One of them rumbled in that controlled fire voice. "The queen expects you. The young ones have been restless since your departure yesterday." Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. "Restless how?" "They have not returned to their nest," the guard replied, which seemed to amuse him in some reptilian way. "They have spent the night exploring areas of the residence they have ignored for weeks. The queen has not slept." The doors opened, and Marcus entered the humid, crystal-lit world of the royal wing once again. But something was immediately different. Where yesterday the atmosphere had been heavy with worry and the oppressive weight of impending tragedy, today there was a sense of cautious energy. He could hear sounds coming from deeper in the residence. Not the morning silence of yesterday, but actual activity. As he made his way through the prescribed path, Marcus encountered his first surprise. One of the twins was sitting in the middle of the corridor, apparently fascinated by a maintenance panel he had been working on the day before. The small dragon looked up at his approach and made that wind chime sound he had heard yesterday, then scrambled to its feet with obvious excitement. "Good morning," Marcus said carefully, not sure if speaking directly to the royal children was allowed, but unable to ignore the creature's obvious greeting. The twins' response was a burst of excited chirping and a little hop that made Marcus smile despite his nervousness. The young dragon was definitely healthier looking than yesterday. Its scales had more luster, its movements were more coordinated, and its eyes were bright and curious. "Kef has been waiting for you," came Queen Zephyra's voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see the massive queen approaching, her expression something he couldn't quite read. "She's been sitting in that spot for 3 hours?" Marcus asked. "Yes. Kef is my daughter. Her brother Zeth is investigating your cleaning supplies, which we have moved to the main chamber for his safety." They entered the central living area to find a scene of controlled chaos. The second twin, Zeth, apparently, had somehow gotten into Marcus's cleaning cart and was currently examining a bottle of surface polish with the kind of intense scientific interest usually reserved for important archaeological discoveries. Various cleaning implements were scattered around the nest area, and Zeth himself was covered in what looked like several different types of cleaning solution. "Oh no," Marcus said, hurrying forward. "Those chemicals aren't meant for—" He stopped abruptly, realizing he was about to lecture the Queen of the Draconian Empire about child safety. But Queen Zephyr was laughing. It was a sound like distant thunder mixed with wind chimes, beautiful and alien. "Do not concern yourself, Marcus-chun. Draconian physiology is quite resilient, and it is the first time in weeks that Zeth has shown interest in anything." As if summoned by his name, Zeth looked up from his chemical investigation and spotted Marcus. The young dragon's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. He dropped the bottle he was holding and bounded across the room with surprising speed, stopping just short of actually tackling Marcus's legs. "I think he missed you," Queen Zephyr observed. Marcus knelt down to Zeth's level, noting that the young dragon was indeed much healthier looking than yesterday. His movements were stronger, his breathing was normal, and his scales had that same improved luster Marcus had noticed in his sister. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly. "I see you've been exploring." Zeth responded with a complex series of chirps and clicks that sounded almost like he was trying to explain his morning's activities. Behind them, Kef had entered the room and was adding her own commentary to whatever story her brother was telling. "They are attempting to communicate with you in their own language," Queen Zephyra explained. "It is unprecedented. Normally, young Draconians do not attempt complex communication with other species until they are much older." Marcus found himself genuinely touched by the twins' obvious excitement at his arrival. "Can you understand what they're saying? Kef is explaining that she waited for you because yesterday you made the good sounds while working. Zeth is proudly describing his investigation of your tools and expressing hope that you will make the good sounds again today." "The good sounds?" Marcus asked. "You're humming," the Queen clarified. "It seems to have made quite an impression." Over the next few hours, Marcus fell into a routine that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He worked his way through the royal wing's pristine rooms, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, while the twins followed him like eager pupils. And everywhere he went, he hummed. He hummed work songs from the mining colonies, lullabies his mother had taught him, folk tunes from Earth's various regions, and even some popular music from the entertainment feeds. The twins seemed to love all of it equally, often attempting to harmonize with crystal chime voices that turned his simple melodies into something beautiful and alien. But more importantly, they began to eat. It started small. While Marcus was humming and cleaning in what the Queen called the nourishment chamber, Zeth approached one of the feeding stations and actually took a bite of the specially prepared food that had been sitting untouched for days. It was just a small taste, but Queen Zephyr's sharp intake of breath told Marcus how significant it was. "Continue your work," the Queen said quietly. "Do not acknowledge what is happening." So Marcus continued to hum and clean, pretending not to notice his first Zeth, and then Kef began to eat with something approaching normal appetite. The food itself was fascinating to observe. It looked like crystallized starlight, shifting colors as the twins consumed it. According to Queen Zephyra, it was a specially formulated nutrient paste that contained everything young Draconians needed for healthy growth. "They have consumed more in the past hour than in the previous week combined," the Queen informed him when the twins had finally eaten their fill and returned to following him around. "The physicians will be quite pleased." But Marcus could sense there was something else on the Queen's mind. Throughout the morning, he had caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't suspicion exactly, but it was definitely calculation. "Your Majesty," he said during a break in his work, "is there something else I can help you with?" Queen Zephyra was quiet for a long moment, watching her children as they played with some of Marcus's cleaning tools under his supervision. "Tell me about human children," she said finally. "Human children?" Marcus wasn't sure where this was leading. "Yes. How do they How do human parents ensure their offspring thrive? What methods do you use? Marcus thought about the question carefully. Well, every child is different, but mostly we try to make them feel safe and loved. We play with them, sing to them, tell them stories. We try to make learning fun, make eating fun, make everything into a kind of game when they're very young. Games, the Queen repeated thoughtfully. Yes, human children learn better when they're enjoying themselves. If you can make something fun, they'll want to do it. Queen Zephyr nodded slowly. This is not the draconian way. Our young are expected to be serious, to understand the weight of their heritage and responsibilities from an early age. Perhaps. She paused, watching as Kef attempted to mimic Marcus's humming while polishing a decorative statue. Perhaps this is why they have been struggling. Marcus felt like he was walking into dangerous diplomatic territory. I'm sure draconian methods work well for draconian children, Your Majesty. I wouldn't presume to suggest, but my children are not thriving under draconian methods, the Queen interrupted. They are dying, and in one day, you have accomplished what our finest specialists could not. She turned those golden eyes on him again. I am beginning to suspect that my children are not entirely draconian. The implications of that statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the royal twins were hybrid children, the political consequences would be enormous. The Draconian Empire's power structure was built on the purity of the royal bloodline. Your Majesty, I'm sure I don't understand. Their father was not draconian, Queen Zephyr said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He was from a species that values play, creativity, the joy of discovery. A species that makes learning into games and finds music in the simplest tasks. Marcus felt his throat go dry. What species? A species that was destroyed in the war with the Vorthack before my children were born. A species that no longer exists except perhaps in the genetic heritage of two small children who respond to humming and curiosity and kindness. The weight of this revelation was staggering. Marcus looked at the twins, who were currently engaged in what appeared to be an elaborate game involving his spray bottles and a great deal of giggling, and felt a profound sense of sadness for what had been lost. Does anyone else know? He asked. Only my most trusted advisors, and they believe the genetic testing was inconclusive. I have allowed them to believe that any unusual traits are simply mutations within the royal line. The Queen's voice carried a heavy burden. But watching my children respond to you, seeing them thrive under methods that are so fundamentally different from our own, I can no longer deny what they truly are. What will you do? That depends, Queen Zephyr said, on whether you are willing to help me save them. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the residence entrance. Raised voices, the sound of many feet moving quickly, and underneath it all, a sound that made Marcus's blood run cold. Kef and Zeth had both gone completely silent. Queen Zephyr's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Where before she had been a mother, sharing her fears about her children, now she was suddenly, every inch the ruler of a galactic empire. Her scales seemed to darken. Her wings spread slightly in a display of power and dominance. Someone comes, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that could command fleets. Someone who should not be here. The entrance to the central chamber burst open, revealing a delegation of Draconians in formal robes. At their head was a figure Marcus recognized from the diplomatic briefings. Lord Commander Thane, the Queen's chief military advisor and, according to station gossip, her primary political rival within the Draconian government. Your Majesty, Thane said, his voice carrying barely concealed displeasure. We must speak immediately. Then, speak, Queen Zephyr replied coolly. Though I am surprised to find you in the royal wing without invitation. The security of the Empire supersedes protocol, Thane said. We have received disturbing reports about the methods being employed in the care of the royal offspring. Marcus felt the twins press against his legs, clearly frightened by the newcomer's hostile demeanor. Without thinking about it, he began to hum softly, just loud enough for them to hear. What reports? The Queen demanded. that you have allowed an alien servant to interfere with the royal children, that you have permitted unauthorized access to the royal wing, that you have abandoned proper draconian child-rearing practices in favor of barbaric alternatives. The last phrase was directed at Marcus, and the contempt in Thane's voice was unmistakable. Several of his companions were now looking at Marcus with expressions ranging from disgust to active hostility. "The care of my children is my concern," Queen Zephyra said, her voice dropping to a dangerous level. "And the results speak for themselves. They are eating, they are active, they are healthy for the first time in weeks. They are being corrupted," Thane replied bluntly. "These techniques may produce short-term improvements, but they will weaken them in the long term. Royal children must be raised with strength, discipline, honor, not with alien songs and frivolous games. And if strength, discipline, and honor were slowly killing them, then they would die as true draconians rather than live as corrupted half-breeds." The silence that followed those words was absolute and terrifying. Queen Zephyra went completely still, and Marcus could practically feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. "Lord Commander Thane, you will explain that statement immediately." But Thane had clearly realized he had gone too far. His aggressive posture faltered, and for the first time since entering the room, he looked uncertain. "Your Majesty, I merely meant that traditional draconian methods. You used the term half-breeds," the Queen interrupted. "A very specific term with very specific implications. You will explain your choice of words." Now, Marcus hugged the twins closer to him, still humming softly as the political drama unfolded around them. But he was beginning to understand that this confrontation was about much more than child-rearing techniques. This was about the future of the Draconian Empire itself. The tension in the royal wing was so thick Marcus could practically taste it. Lord Commander Thane stood frozen under Queen Zephyra's deadly stare, while his companions shifted uncomfortably behind him. The twins Kef and Zeph pressed even closer to Marcus, their small bodies trembling with fear or confusion. "Your Majesty," Thane said carefully, "I spoke in haste. I merely intended to express concern about maintaining proper draconian traditions." "You intended," the Queen interrupted, her voice like controlled wildfire, "to reveal information that was shared with you in confidence. Information about the genetic heritage of my children." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through Thane's delegation. Marcus saw eyes widen, heard sharp intakes of breath, watched as the political landscape shifted in real time. Some of the delegates looked genuinely surprised, but others showed no surprise at all. "The genetic tests were inconclusive," Thane said quickly. "Were they?" Queen Zephyra's golden eyes narrowed. "Or were they simply inconvenient for those who would prefer a more pure succession?" Marcus found himself caught in the middle of what was clearly a palace intrigue of galactic proportions. He continued humming softly to keep the twins calm, but his mind was racing. The implications were staggering. If the royal twins were indeed hybrids, it could destabilize the entire draconian power structure. And if there was a faction within the government that knew about it— "Your Majesty," one of the other delegates spoke up, a smaller draconian with darker scales and nervous mannerisms. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Privacy," the Queen said coldly, "seems to be in short supply lately. Please, Lord Vex, share your concerns openly." Lord Vex glanced nervously at his companions. "The peace negotiations with the Vorthack begin tomorrow. If word of this situation were to reach them, the political consequences would be severe." "What situation?" the Queen demanded. "The situation of royal heirs who may carry the genetic heritage of species the Vorthack exterminated," Thane said, finally finding his courage again. "Do you think they will honor a peace treaty with an empire ruled by the offspring of their victims?" Marcus felt sick. He looked down at Kef and Zeph, these two bright, curious children who had spent the morning playing and learning and eating and tried to imagine them as political pawns in a galactic power struggle. The thought made him angry in a way he hadn't felt since the mining accident that had ended his old life. "So what do you suggest?" Queen Zephyra asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The children must be removed from the succession," Thane said bluntly, "for the good of the Empire. And if I refuse, then the Council will be forced to take more direct action." The threat hung in the air like a live explosive. Marcus might not know much about draconian politics, but he understood power struggles. Thane was essentially threatening a coup. But Queen Zephyra just smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Marcus had ever seen. "Lord Commander," she said sweetly, "you seem to be laboring under several misapprehensions. First, that you have any authority over the royal succession. Second, that the genetic heritage of my children is somehow shameful rather than precious. And third, that I am powerless to respond to threats against them." She gestured with one clawed hand, and suddenly the chamber was filled with new arrivals. Not more politicians, but soldiers. Royal guards in ceremonial armor that looked anything but ceremonial, their weapons obviously functional and ready. "Captain Kara," the queen addressed the leader of the guards, a fierce-looking female with silver-edged scales. "Please escort Lord Commander Thane and his delegation to secure quarters. They will remain there until I decide what to do with them." "Your Majesty," Thane protested, "you cannot. I am Queen of the Draconian Empire," Zephyr said, rising to her full, impressive height. "I could do anything I please with traitors who threaten my children." As the guards moved to arrest Thane and his companions, the political implications crashed down on Marcus like an avalanche. Civil war in the Draconian Empire. The collapse of peace negotiations with the Vorthak. Possibly renewed warfare across multiple star systems. And at the center of it all, two small children who just wanted to play and learn and be loved. "Your Majesty," Marcus said quietly, "what happens now?" "Now," the queen replied, watching as her enemies were led away, "we prepare for war." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The royal wing became a command center with loyal advisors coming and going, reports flowing in from across the empire, and military preparations being made. Throughout it all, Kef and Zeth stayed close to Marcus, clearly frightened by the sudden change in atmosphere. Marcus did his best to keep them calm, humming when they seemed scared, playing simple games with his cleaning supplies, even teaching them basic words in Standard Galactic. But he could see the strain on their small faces, the way they flinched whenever voices were raised or new people arrived. They sensed the tension, Queen Zephyra explained during a brief break in the crisis management. "Young Draconians are very empathic. They know something is wrong. What can I do to help them?" "Continue being yourself," the Queen said. "Continue showing them that there are beings in the universe who will care for them simply because they deserve care." But Marcus was beginning to realize that his role in this crisis might be more significant than just child care. Throughout the day, various advisors and military officers have been studying him with obvious curiosity. Some seemed suspicious, others appeared thoughtful, and a few looked at him with something approaching respect. Human Marcus Chun. One of them finally approached him directly. It was Captain Kyra, the leader of the Royal Guard. "The Queen speaks highly of your influence on the royal children." "I just try to keep them happy," Marcus replied. "Yes," Kyra said thoughtfully. "This is not a draconian concept, making children happy for its own sake. We focus on making them strong, preparing them for the burdens of power. But perhaps there is wisdom in your approach." "I wouldn't know about wisdom. I just know what worked with my little sister when she was scared." "You have siblings?" "Had. She died in the same mining accident that brought me here." Kyra's expression softened slightly. "I am sorry for your loss. But perhaps her memory serves the Empire now, through the care you show our royal heirs." Before Marcus could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red, and the artificial gravity fluctuated slightly as the station's defensive systems came online. "What's happening?" Marcus asked, instinctively pulling the twins closer. "The Vorthak delegation has arrived early," Kyra said grimly, "and they've brought a fleet." The main display screen in the royal wing lit up with an image that made Marcus's blood run cold. Dozens of ships hung in space around the station, their sleek, predatory lines unmistakably Vorthak. Each vessel bristled with weapons, and their formation suggested they were ready for battle rather than negotiation. "They know," Queen Zephyra said quietly. "Somehow, they know about my children." "How is that possible?" Marcus asked. Lord Commander Thane had many opportunities to communicate off-station, Captain Kyra replied. "It appears his treachery runs deeper than we realized." The implications were staggering. If the Vorthak had come here planning to use the twins' hybrid heritage as justification for renewed warfare, the peace negotiations were already over before they began. "Your Majesty," one of the Queen's advisors approached urgently. "The Vorthak Prime Minister is demanding immediate audience with you. He claims to have information about genetic irregularities in the royal line." Queen Zephyra closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, Marcus could see she had made a decision. "Very well," she said. "Inform the Prime Minister that I will meet with him in 1 hour. Full formal protocols." "Your Majesty," Captain Kyra protested, "it could be a trap." "Of course it's a trap," the Queen replied. "But we cannot avoid this confrontation forever. And perhaps it's time the galaxy learned the truth about my children." She turned to Marcus. "I have a request to make of you, Marcus Chun. One that goes far beyond your duties as a maintenance worker." "What kind of request?" "I want you and my children to attend the formal meeting with the Vorthak delegation." Marcus felt his knees go weak. "Your Majesty, I'm not a diplomat. I don't know anything about formal protocols, or you know how to care for children who are frightened," the Queen interrupted. "You know how to make them feel safe in dangerous situations. And most importantly, you represent what my children truly are, a bridge between different ways of being, different approaches to life." "I don't understand." "The Vorthak will expect to see weak children, corrupted by alien influence, unfit to rule. Instead, I want them to see what you have shown me, that strength comes in many forms, that leadership can be built on compassion as well as conquest, that the future of our empires might lie not in pure bloodlines, but in the willingness to learn from each other." Marcus looked down at Kef and Zeth, who were listening to this conversation with the kind of intense attention that suggested they understood more than anyone realized. They had been through so much in their short lives, had been used as political pawns by adults who saw them as problems to be solved rather than children to be protected. "What if I mess this up?" he asked. "Then you mess it up honestly," the Queen replied, "which is more than I can say for most politicians." As if summoned by her words, Zeth looked up at Marcus and made a soft chirping sound. When Marcus looked down at him, the young dragon began to hum, not the crystal chime harmony Marcus had grown used to, but an actual melody. A human melody. It was the lullaby Marcus had been humming that first day, reproduced with perfect pitch and obvious love. "He's been practicing," Queen Zephyra observed softly. "They both have. They want to make the good sounds for you, the way you make them for them." And suddenly Marcus understood. This wasn't about politics or bloodlines or galactic power struggles. It was about two children who had found someone who cared about them and who wanted to show their love the only way they knew how. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do it." The Queen smiled, and for a moment, she wasn't the ruler of a galactic empire. She was just a mother who was grateful that someone else loved her children. "Thank you, Marcus Chun, for everything." As they prepared for what could be the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history, Marcus found himself thinking about his sister. She would have loved Kef, and Zeth would have spent hours playing with them and teaching them songs and making them laugh. Maybe, in some small way, he was carrying on her legacy. Maybe that was enough. The formal meeting was scheduled to take place in the station's largest conference chamber, a massive space designed to accommodate delegations from multiple species. As Marcus helped the twins into the ceremonial robes that marked them as members of the royal family, he He tried not to think about how young they looked, how vulnerable. Remember, he told them softly, if you get scared, just look at me. I'll be right there with you. Both twins chirped their understanding, and Kef reached out to touch his hand with one small, clawed finger. Ready? Queen Zephyr asked. Marcus took a deep breath. Ready. Together, they walked toward a confrontation that would determine the future of the galaxy. The Grand Conference Chamber was a marvel of interspecies engineering, designed to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of the galaxy's major civilizations. The ceiling soared nearly 100 feet overhead, with atmospheric processors that could create different environmental zones for different species. The floor was made of some kind of adaptive material that could shift between textures and temperatures as needed. Today, it felt like walking into a court of judgment. The Vorthack delegation had arrived in full ceremonial regalia, their crystalline forms reflecting the chamber's lights like living prisms. Prime Minister Tar stood at the head of their group, his body composed of what appeared to be living diamond formations that shifted and reformed as he moved. Behind him, a dozen other Vorthack officials arranged themselves in precise geometric patterns, their collective presence both beautiful and intimidating. Marcus had never seen a Vorthack up close before. They were silicon-based life forms that had evolved on a world with intense radiation and crushing gravity. Their bodies were essentially living crystals that could reshape themselves at will, and they communicated through harmonic frequencies that could shatter glass at close range. They were also, according to every historical account Marcus had ever read, utterly ruthless in warfare. The Galactic Council mediators had already taken their positions at the center of the chamber, representing the neutral parties who would oversee the negotiations. Marcus recognized Ambassador Torvin of the Altarian Collective, whose blue skin seemed to glow under the chamber's lights, and High Counselor Yith from Ethereal Conclave, whose translucent form flickered between dimensions. And, at the far end of the chamber, Queen Zephyr made her entrance with all the majesty her position commanded. She was magnificent. Her scales had been polished to mirror brightness, reflecting the chamber's lights like liquid metal. Her wings were fully extended in a display of power and dominance, and the ceremonial armor she wore made her look like a goddess of war. Every step she took echoed through the vast space, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of millions of years of draconian supremacy. Prime Minister Tar, she said formally, I welcome the Vorthack delegation to this station, though I confess surprise at the martial nature of your arrival. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister replied, his voice a complex harmony of crystalline chimes. Circumstances have compelled us to take precautions. We have received disturbing information about the nature of these peace negotiations. What information? Information suggesting that the draconian royal succession has been compromised. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus felt Kef and Zeth press closer to him, clearly sensing the hostility in the chamber despite their youth. He began humming softly, just loud enough for them to hear, trying to keep them calm. I am not aware of any compromise to the royal succession, Queen Zephyr replied coolly. Then, you deny that your offspring carry the genetic heritage of the Veltar? The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus had never heard of the Veltar, but the reaction in the chamber told him everything he needed to know. This was the species that had been destroyed in the war, the species that was the twins' paternal heritage. The genetic heritage of my children, Queen Zephyr said carefully, is a matter of draconian internal affairs. Not when that heritage makes them unfit to rule. Prime Minister Tar replied bluntly. The Veltar were a conquered people, destroyed for their weakness and their inability to accept the natural order of galactic power. Any offspring carrying their genetic material would be similarly weak, similarly unfit for leadership. Marcus felt a surge of anger, so intense it surprised him. These weren't politicians debating abstract policy. They were talking about two children who were sitting right there, listening to every word. He looked down at Kef and Zeth and saw confusion and hurt in their bright eyes. The natural order, Queen Zephyr repeated slowly. According to whom? According to reality, the Prime Minister said, the strong rule, the weak serve or die. This has been the way of things for millions of years. The Veltar refused to accept this truth, and they were eliminated. Any attempt to restore their genetic line through hybrid offspring is an affront to galactic stability. And if I disagree with your assessment, then there can be no peace between our peoples. The Vorthak hegemony will not sign treaties with an empire ruled by the descendants of our defeated enemies. Marcus could see the trap closing around them. The Vorthak had come here not to negotiate peace, but to force the queen to choose between her children and her empire. Either she would abandon Kef and Zeth, or the war would continue. But Queen Zephyra was not finished. Prime Minister, she said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge, you speak of strength and weakness as if they are simple concepts, easily measured. But perhaps your understanding is limited. Limited, yes. You measure strength by the ability to destroy, to conquer, to impose your will through force. But there are other kinds of strength, other measures of fitness to rule. She gestured toward Marcus and the twins. My children have faced challenges that would destroy most adults. They have been dying slowly and painfully from conditions that the finest physicians in the galaxy could not treat. And yet, when faced with a different approach, one based on compassion, creativity, and understanding, they not only survived but thrived. Sentimental weakness. Prime Minister Kael'tar dismissed. Is it? Queen Zephyra asked. Human Marcus Chun, please step forward. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. This was not part of the plan they had discussed. But the queen's golden eyes were fixed on him expectantly, and Kef and Zeth were looking up at him with absolute trust. Taking a deep breath, Marcus walked toward the center of the chamber, the twins staying close beside him. Every eye in the room was on them, and he felt like he was walking through a minefield. Prime Minister, Queen Zephyra continued, this human has accomplished what our finest specialists could not. He has restored my children to health, not through force or domination, but through patience, kindness, and understanding. Would you call such accomplishment weakness? I would call it irrelevant, the Prime Minister replied. Children's games have no place in the governance of galactic empires. Then, demonstrate the superiority of your approach, the Queen challenged. Show us the strength of Vorthak methods. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Prime Minister Kael'tar's crystalline body began to resonate, producing a sound that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The harmonic frequency was designed to demonstrate Vorthak power, to show their ability to reshape matter and energy through pure sonic force. The sound was overwhelming. Marcus felt it in his bones, in his teeth, in every cell of his body. The chamber's lights flickered, and he could see cracks beginning to form in some of the decorative elements. But what the Prime Minister hadn't expected was the twins' reaction. Instead of cowering or crying, Kef and Zeth began to sing. Their crystal chime voices joined the harmonic frequency, but instead of being overpowered by it, they began to weave around it, creating something entirely new. The destructive resonance became part of a complex musical pattern, beautiful and intricate and utterly unprecedented. The effect was magical. The cracks in the chamber walls began to heal themselves, resonating in harmony with the twins' song. The flickering lights steadied and began to pulse in rhythm with the music. And the overwhelming, aggressive force of the Vorthak demonstration was transformed into something that celebrated creation rather than destruction. Prime Minister Kael'tar stopped his demonstration abruptly, his crystalline form showing what Marcus interpreted as shock. Impossible, he said. No organic being can manipulate harmonic frequencies at that level of complexity. No pure organic being, Queen Zephyra corrected. But my children are not pure organic beings. They are something new, something that combines the best traits of multiple species. They took your demonstration of power and transformed it into something beautiful. Marcus looked down at Kef and Zeth, who were still humming softly, their scales glowing with inner light. They had done something that none of the adults in the room fully understood, but the implications were staggering. You see, the Queen continued, this is what you call weakness. The ability to take something destructive and make it creative. The power to transform conflict into harmony. The strength to build bridges between different ways of being. Genetic contamination, Prime Minister Kael'tar said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Evolution, Queen Zephyr replied. The galaxy is changing, Prime Minister. The old ways of thinking, the old divisions between species and empires, they are becoming obsolete. My children represent the future, not because they are weak, but because they are stronger than any of us imagined possible. Marcus watched the political calculus playing out in real time. The other members of the Vorthack delegation were talking among themselves in harmonic frequencies too complex for the universal translators to interpret. The Galactic Council mediators were clearly fascinated by what they had just witnessed. And throughout it all, Kef and Zeth stood beside him, calm and confident in a way that seemed impossible for children their age. The demonstration proves nothing, Prime Minister Kael'tar said finally, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Then, let me prove something else, Queen Zephyr said. Human Marcus Chun, would you be willing to share your observations about my children with this assembly? Marcus felt every eye in the chamber turn to him again. This was it, the moment when everything would be decided. He looked down at Kef and Zeth, who looked back at him with absolute trust, and suddenly he knew what he had to say. Prime Minister, he began, his voice shakier than he would have liked. You talk about strength and weakness like they're opposites. But that's not how it works with children. He paused, gathering his courage. These kids are dying because everyone was trying to make them strong the wrong way. They were being forced to be something they weren't, to fit into boxes that were too small for what they really are. And were they really? The Prime Minister asked. They're children, Marcus said simply. They're curious, they're creative, they want to learn and play and be loved. They want to understand the world around them, not dominate it. And when someone finally gave them permission to be children, they became stronger than anyone imagined. He gestured toward the twins. They just took your weapon and turned it into music. They took your demonstration of power and made it into art. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength that could change the galaxy. The words of a servant, Prime Minister Kael'tar said dismissively. The words of someone who cares about them, Marcus replied, finding his courage. And maybe that's what this galaxy needs more of, people who care about each other instead of just caring about power. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tense pauses. This felt like a moment of decision, a fulcrum on which the future would balance. Then Kef spoke. It was the first time Marcus had heard her use actual words instead of chirps and chimes, and her voice was clear and strong despite her youth. Why are you angry at us? She asked, looking directly at Prime Minister Kael'tar. We didn't hurt anyone. We just wanted to make pretty sounds. The question hung in the air like a revelation. Here was a child asking the most fundamental question of all. Why was there so much hatred for something so innocent? And for the first time since the meeting began, Prime Minister Kael'tar had no answer.